spans off. Even the undergrowth seemed thinner than back home. The bushes and vines and briars spread out in patches, though some of those were not small. Everything was brown and dry. She plucked the lace-edged handkerchief from her sleeve and dabbed at the sweat that suddenly seemed to pop out on her face. "Which way do we go?" she asked. By the sun, north lay over the slope, the direction she would choose. The city should lie about 7 or 8 miles in that direction. With luck, they could walk all the way back without encountering anyone. Or better, given her heeled boots and the terrain, not to mention the heat, Rand could decide to give up and make another gateway back to the Sun Palace. The palace rooms were cool compared to this. Before he could answer, crackling brush and leaves announced someone coming. The rider who appeared on a long-legged gray gelding with bright-fringed bridle and reins was a Kyrianan woman, short and slender in a dark blue, nearly black silk riding dress, horizontal slashes of red and green and white running from her neck to below her knees. The sweat on her face could not diminish her pale beauty or make her eyes less than large, dark pools. A small, clear green stone hung on her forehead from a fine golden chain, fastened in black hair that fell in waves to her shoulders. Min gasped, and not for the hunting crossbow the woman carried, casually raised in one green-gloved hand. For a moment she was sure it was Moiraine. But "I do not recall seeing either of you in camp," the woman said in a throaty, almost sultry voice. Moiraine's voice had been crystal. The crossbow lowered still quite casually until it pointed rock steady at Rand's chest. He ignored it. "I thought I might like to take a look at your camp," he said with a slight bow. "I believe you are the Lady Caroline Damodred?" The slender woman inclined her head, acknowledging the name. Min sighed regretfully, but it was not as if she had really expected Moiraine to turn up alive. Moiraine was the only viewing of hers that had ever failed. But Caroline Damodred herself, one of the leaders of the rebellion against Rand here in Cairhien and a claimant to the Sun Throne, he really was pulling all the threads of the pattern around him to have her appear. Lady Caroline slowly raised the crossbow to one side. The cord made a loud snap, launching the broadhead bolt into the air. "I doubt one would do any good against you," she said, walking her gelding slowly toward them, "and I would not like you to think I was threatening you." She looked once at Min, just a glance that ran head to toe, though Min was sure everything about her was filed away. But aside from that, Lady Caroline kept her eyes on Rand. She drew rein 3 paces away, just far enough so he could not reach her a foot before she could dig in her heels. "I can only think of one gray-eyed man with your height who might suddenly appear out of nowhere, unless perhaps you are an Aiel in disguise. But perhaps you will be so kind as to supply a name." "I'm the Dragon Reborn," Rand said, every bit as arrogant as he had been with the sea folk. Yet if any ta'veren swirling of the pattern was at work, the woman on the horse gave no evidence. Rather than leaping down to fall to her knees, she merely nodded, pursing her lips. "I have heard so very much about you. I have heard you went to the tower to submit to the Amalensi. I have heard you mean to give the Sun Throne to Elaine Fracand. I've also heard that you killed Elaine and her mother." "I submit to no one," Rand replied sharply. He stared up at her with eyes fierce enough to snatch her out of the saddle by themselves. "Elaine is on her way to Caemlyn as we speak, to take the throne of Andor, after which she will have the throne of Cairhien as well." Min winced. Did he have to sound like a pillow stuffed full of haughty? She had hoped he had calmed down a bit after the sea folk. Lady Caroline laid her crossbow across the saddle in front of her, running a gloved hand along it, perhaps regretting that loosed bolt. "I could accept my young cousin on the throne. Better she than some, at least. But—" those big dark eyes that had seemed so liquid suddenly became stone. but I am not sure I can accept you in Caire. And I do not mean only your changes to laws and customs. You change fate by your very presence. Every day since you came, people die in accidents so bizarre no one can believe them. So many husbands abandon their wives and wives their husbands that no one even comments upon it now. You will tear Kyrian apart just by remaining here. Balance, Min broke in hastily. Rand's face was so dark he looked ready to burst. Maybe he had been right to come after all. Certainly there was no point letting him throw this meeting away in a tantrum. She gave no one a chance to speak. There is always a balance of good against bad. That's how the pattern works. Even he doesn't change that. As night balances day, good balances harm. Since he came, there hasn't been a single stillbirth in the city, not one child born deformed. There are more marriages some days than used to be in a week, and for every man who chokes to death on a feather, a woman tumbles head over heels down 3 flights of stairs, and instead of breaking her neck, stands up without a bruise. Name the evil and you can point to the good. The turning of the wheel requires balance, and he only increases the chances of what might have happened anyway in nature. Suddenly she colored, realizing they were both looking at her, staring more like. Balance, Rand murmured, eyebrows lifting. I've been reading some of Master Fell's books, she said faintly. She did not want anyone to think she was pretending to be a philosopher. Lady Caroline smiled at her tall saddle bow and toyed with her reins. The woman was laughing at her. She would show this woman what she could laugh at. Abruptly, a tall black gelding with the look of a warhorse came crashing through the undergrowth, ridden by a man well into his middle years, with close-cropped hair and a pointed beard. Despite his yellow Tyran coat, the fat sleeves striped with green satin, eyes of a startling pretty blue looked out of his damp dark face like pale polished sapphires. Not a particularly pretty man, but those eyes made up for a too long nose. He carried a crossbow in one leather gauntleted hand and brandished a broad-head bolt in the other. This came down inches from my face, Caroline, and it has your markings. Just because there's no game is no reason. He became aware of Rand and Min just then, and his drawn crossbow lowered toward them. Are these strays, Caroline? Or did you find spies from the city? I've never believed Al Thor would continue to let us sit here unhindered. Half a dozen more riders appeared behind him, sweating men in fat-sleeved coats with satin stripes, and perspiring women in riding dresses with wide, thick lace collars, all carrying crossbows. The last of those riders had not halted, horses stamping and tossing heads, before twice as many came struggling through the brush from another direction and pulled up near Caroline. Slight, pale men and women in dark clothes with stripes of color, sometimes to below the waist, all with crossbows. Servants afoot came after, laboring and panting with the heat, the men who would dress and carry any downed game. It hardly seemed to matter that none had more than a skinning knife at his belt. Min swallowed, and unconsciously began patting her cheeks with her handkerchief a little more vigorously. If even one person recognized Rand before he knew it. Lady Caroline did not hesitate. Not spies, darling, she said, turning her horse to face the Tyran newcomers. The High Lord Darlin Cisnera. All that was needed now was Lord Toram Riotin. Min wished Rand's Taviran tugging at the pattern just a little less complete. A cousin and his wife, Caroline went on, come from Andor to see me. May I present Thomas I can? From a nice friend. And his wife, Dicey. Min glared at him. The only Dicey he had ever known had been a dusty queen before he was 20, and sour and bad-tempered to boot. Darlin's gaze swept over Rand again, lingered a moment on Min. He lowered his crossbow and bowed his head just a hair, a high lord of Tyr to a minor noble.
Hey, how you doing, Joe's Choice?
It takes a brave man
Thanks
to
for
pull off
stopping
in
by.
present circumstances.
I have the camera right on in a second. I'm just throwing a grub real quick.
Lady Caroline gave him an exasperated look that he made a show of not seeing. He noted that Rand's return bow was no more than his, however, noted and frowned. A darkly handsome woman in his retinue muttered angrily under her breath. She had a long, hard face, well practiced in anger, and a stout fellow, scowling and sweating in a red-striped coat of pale green, heeled his horse forward a few steps as if thinking to ride Rand down. "The wheel weaves as the wheel wills," Rand said coolly, as though he noticed nothing. The dragon reborn to just about anybody was what it was. Arrogance on a mountaintop. Not much happens as we expect. For instance, I heard you were in Tyr, in Haddon Merk. Min wished she dared speak up, dared say something to soothe him. She settled for stroking his arm, casually. A wife. Now there was a word that suddenly sounded fine. A wife idly patting her husband. Another fine word. Might, it was hard being fair. It was hardly fair having to be fair. The High Lord Darlin has but lately come by longboat with a few of his close friends, Thomas. Caroline's throaty tone never changed, but her gelding suddenly pranced, no doubt at a sharp heel, and under cover of regaining control, she turned her back to Darlin and shot Rand a brief warning frown. "Do not trouble the High Lord, Thomas." "I do not mind, Caroline," Darlin said, slinging his crossbow from his saddle by a loop. He rode a little closer and rested an arm on his tall saddlebow. "A man should know what he is stepping into. You may have heard the tales about Althor going to the tower, Thomas. I came because Aes Sedai approached me months ago with suggestions that might happen, and your cousin informed me she had received the same. We thought we might put her on the Sun Throne before Colaver could take it. Well, Althor is no fool. Never believe he is. Myself, I think he played the tower like a harp. Colaver is hanged. He sits secure behind Cyrion's walls, without an Aes Sedai halter, I'll wager, no matter what rumor says. And until we find some way to extricate ourselves, we sit in his hand, waiting for him to make a fist." "A ship brought you," Rand said simply. "A ship will take you away." Abruptly, Min realized he was gently patting her hand on his arm, trying to soothe her. Startlingly, Darlin threw back his head and laughed. A great many women would forget his nose for those eyes and that laugh. "So it would, Thomas. But I've asked your cousin to marry me. She will not say yes or no. But a man cannot abandon even a possible wife to the mercies of the Aiel, and she will not leave." Caroline Damodred drew herself up on her saddle, face cold enough to shame an Aes Sedai, and suddenly auras of red and white flashed around her and Darlin, and Min knew. The colors never seemed to matter, but she knew that they would marry, after Caroline had led him a merry chase. More, to her eyes, a crown suddenly appeared on Darlin's head, a simple golden circlet with a slightly curved sword lying on its side above his brows. The king's crown he would wear one day, though of what country she could not say. Tyr had high lords instead of a king. Imogen auras vanished as Darlin pulled his horse around to face Caroline. "There's no game to be found today. Hiram has already returned to camp. I suggest you do the same." Those blue eyes scanned the surrounding trees quickly. "It seems your cousin and his wife have lost their horses. They will wander in the careless zone," he added to Rand in a kindly tone. He knew very well they had no horses. "But I'm sure Rover and Inez will give up their mounts. A walk in the air will do good." The stout man in the red-striped coat swung down from his tall bay immediately, with a toadying smile for Darlin, and one markedly less warm, if just as breezy, for Rand. The angry-faced woman was a moment later climbing.
I hope everyone had a good weekend.
She did not look pleased. Neither was
Everyone's having a safe evening or morning.
She whispered as Rand led her to the horses. "Are you mad?" she added touching her nose with the tip of one finger. Thanks to you, I know that. And he boosted her onto the mare, then climbed into the bay's saddle and heeled the animal up beside Darla. Heading north and a little toward the west across the slope, they left Robert and Inez standing beneath the trees, frowning at one another sourly. As they fell in behind with the Kyrian, and the other Tyrants shouted laughing wishes that the pair would enjoy the walk. Min would have ridden alongside Rand, but Caroline put a hand on her arm, drawing her in back of the two men. I want to see what he does, Caroline said quietly. Which one, Min wondered. You are his lover? Caroline asked. Yes, Min told her defiantly, once she could catch a breath. Her cheeks felt like thunder, but the woman only nodded, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And it was in Kyrian. Sometimes she realized that all the sophistication she had picked up talking to worldly people was about as thick as her blouse. Rand and Darlin rode knee to knee just ahead, the younger man half a head taller than the older, each wrapped in pride like their cloak, but talking just the same. Listening was not easy. They spoke quietly, and the dead leaves rustling under the horses' hooves, fallen branches cracking, often was enough to muffle their words. The cry of a hawk overhead and the chattering of a squirrel in a tree drowned them. Still, it was possible to overhear snatches. If I may say so, Thomas, Darlin said at one point as they headed down after the first rise, and under the might I offer you disrespect, you are fortunate in having a beautiful wife. The light willing, I will have one as beautiful myself. Why do they not speak of something important? Caroline muttered. Min turned her head to hide a small smile. The Lady Caroline did not look half as displeased as she sounded. She herself had never cared whether anyone thought her pretty or not. Well, until she met Rand, anyway. Maybe Darlin's nose was not all that long. I would have let him take Kalendor from the stone, Darlin said some time later as they climbed a sparsely treed slope. But I could not stand aside when he brought Aiel invaders into Tyr. I've read the prophecies of the dragon, Rand said, leaning forward on the bay's neck and urging the animal on. A fine, glossy appearance the horse had, but no more bottom than his own suspected. The stone had to fall before he could take Kalendor, Rand continued. Other tyrant lords follow him, so I hear. Darlin snorted. They cringe and lick his boots. I could have followed if that was what he wanted. If, with a sigh, he shook his head. Too many ifs, Thomas. There is a saying in Tyr. Any quarrel can be forgiven, but kings never forget. Tyr has not been under a king since Arthur Hawkwing, but I think
Hey, Bassie. Give me 1 second, bro.
He has attainted me with treason, as he calls it, and I must go on as I began. The light willing, I may see Tyr sovereign on its own land once more before I die. It had to be temporary work. Min knew. The man would never have spoken this way to someone casually met, Caroline Donovan's supposed cousin or not. But what did Rand think? She could hardly wait to tell him about the plan. Topping that hill, they suddenly came on a knot of spearmen, some with a dented breastplate or helmet, most without either, who bowed as soon as they saw the
How you guys doing?
To left and right through the trees, men could see other groups of sentries. Below, the camp lay spread out in what seemed a pleasant haze of dust, down a nearly treeless slope, and across the hill valley and up the next hill. Each of the few tents was large, with some noticeable hanging gently on a staff above the group. Almost
Let's do it, Dab,
as
y'all.
and thousands of men and a handful of women wandered along the cook fires and wagons. None raised a cheer as their leaders rode in. Min studied them over the handkerchief she pressed to her nose against the dust.
Excuse me.
Not caring whether Caroline saw what she was doing. Dispirited faces watched them pass, and grim faces, people who knew they were in a trap. Here and there, a
Got
house of palm stood stiffly above some
a new torch head.
Yet most seemed to be wearing whatever they could find, bits and armor that often neither matched nor fitted very well. Men too tall for Kyrian wore red coats under their battered breastplates. Men wore near obscure white lines on a filthy red sleeve. Darlin could only have brought a few people with him on a long boat. Perhaps no.
I better didn't get this today with
Caroline
a new tank too. I wouldn't be able to do dabs tonight or today until I ended up getting extra money.
The largest Min had ever seen, larger than any she'd ever imagined. A great red striped boot, shining like wax, no fewer than 4 high conical wheels, each with the rising sun of Kyrian stirring above in a lazy breeze. Golden the strumming of harps drifted out amid the murmur of voices like the sounds of fish. As Sid was before the horse, Darlin offered his arm to Caroline. After a very long pause, she laid her fingers lightly on his wrist with no expression whatsoever, letting him escort her inside. My lady wife, Rand murmured with a smile, extending his hand. Min. He had no right to bring her here, Taviran or no Taviran.
It's definitely a lot louder than my last one was.
Soldiers with the fronts of the heads shaved and powdered, plainly men of high rank, like fine pumpkin purse. Bards strolled picked out as much by a lofty air than any noble, as by the carved and gilded harps they carried. Yet Min's eyes flew as it pulled to the sure sword of Rand. Three-eyed Savage
That one was a little too hot.
tucked her hand under his arm and patted him. She would have asked him what they were doing there. Darlin and Caroline had vanished into the crowd along with their followers, yet as a bowing serving man and cloth on his dark cuffs offered glasses to Rand and Min, she reappeared, shaking off the importunings of a hatchet-faced fellow in one of those red coats. He glared at her back as she took a goblet of punch and waved the servant away, and Min's breath caught at the oil that suddenly flashed out of him, bruised, dark they seemed clear. Don't trust that man. She could not stop herself. He will murder anybody he thinks is in his way. He'll kill for a whim. Kill anybody. She clamped her teeth shut before saying more. Caroline glanced over the hatchet-faced man. I could believe it easily, David Hanlon, she said wryly. His white lamb sparkled gold, not tight, and and ordered it seems. That with an arch glance at Rand.
No, that ain't no shit. Not just a dabbing cough. It was a hot dab cough.
Do you know the man, Jason? Min could only shake her head. How to explain what she did know about Hanlon now? That his hands would be red with more rapes and murders before he died. Sometimes before she learned better, it had happened because she learned. I've heard heard of the White Lions, Rand said coldly. Them for dark friends and he wrote they had been men knew that much, and little more, except that the airport had really been rocky. It stood to reason that soldiers serving one of the Forsaken would include dark friends. What of him? Rand nodded toward a man across the tent whose long had as many stripes as very tall for a Kyrianan, perhaps less than a full head shorter than Rand. He was slender except for broad
hot dab.
strikingly good looking. Just a touch of gray. For some reason, Min's eyes were a skinny little fellow with a large nose and wide ears, in a red silk coat that did not fit him very well. He kept fingering a curved dagger at his belt, a fancy piece with a golden sheath and a large red stone cap in the hilt that seemed to catch them up.
A little bit better.
She saw no auras around him. He seemed vaguely familiar. They were both looking at her and Rand. Caroline breathed in a tight voice. Master Jerael Morda. Odious little man. His eyes make me want to take a bath. Both of them. She blinked, surprised at what she had said, but recovered quickly. Min had the feeling little put Caroline Dummerdred off her stride for long. In that she was very like Moraine. I would be careful were I you, cousin Tomas, she went on. You may have wrought some miracle or ta'veren work on me, and perhaps even on Darlin, though I cannot say what it might come to. I make no promises, but Toram hates you with a passion. It was not so bad before Mordeth joined him, yet since Toram would have us attack the city immediately in the night. The Aiel, but I think it is your death he seeks now, even more than he does the throne. Mordeth, Rand said. His eyes were locked to Toram Rioton and the skinny fellow. He was hot on the face, and there are 100,000 golden crowns on his head. Caroline nearly dropped her goblet. Queens have been ransomed for less. What did he do? You ravaged my home because it was my home. Rand's face was his voice off. He brought Trollocs to kill my friends because they were my friends. He is a
Try this one now, since I recovered.
Those last words
This one we just got done trying with the quartz tip.
splashed the carpet as the silver goblet bent into
It's a lot better when it's not a hot dab with that one. You actually get pretty clean, tasty dabs. Is that and let it cool down enough.
He gave way now, channeled who knew how many eyes to die around. For the light's sake, take hold of yourself, she began, and the woman's voice spoke pleasantly behind her. Will you present me to your tall young man? Min looked over her shoulder right into an ageless face, cool-eyed beneath iron gray hair pulled up into a bun, from which dangled small golden horns. Swallowing a squeak, Min thought. She had thought Caroline had taken her in one glance, but these cool eyes seemed to know things about her she herself had forgotten. The Aes Sedai's smile as she adjusted her green-fringed shawl stars swayed as she shook her head. Most boys learn not to stick their
Then heat this one up as long. That new torch head definitely comes out pretty good.
You know I'm a child.
That one's definitely better.
Well, it seems I don't know whether or not those cool eyes drifted to Min, to Caroline, and with a final hitch to her shawl, Katswin herself whisked away into the ground. Min swallowed the lump in her throat and was pleased to see Caroline do the same, self-possession or no. Rand, a blind fool, stared after the Aes Sedai as though intending to go after her. This time it was Caroline who laid a hand on Rand's chest. "I take it you know, Katswin," she said gruffly. Even
Excuse me.
her sisters stand in awe of her. Her throaty tones took on a note of gravity. I have no idea what will come of it. But whatever it is, I think it is time you went home, Cousin Thomas. Past time. I will have horses. "This is your cousin, Caroline," said a deep, rich man's voice, and Min jumped in spite of herself. Toran Rioton was even better looking close up than at a distance, with the sort of strong male beauty and air of worldly knowledge that would have attracted Min before she met Rand. Well, she still found him attractive, just not as much as she did. His friendly smile was quite appealing. Toran's gaze fell to Caroline's hand, still on Rand's chest. "The Lady Caroline is to be my wife," he said lazily. "Did you know that?" Caroline's cheeks reddened angrily. "Do not say that, Toran. I have told you I will not, and I will not." Toran smiled at Rand. "I think you have mind. What do you think, Jerael?" He looked around, scowling. Min stared at him in amazement, and he was so pretty with just the right hair. She wished she could call up viewings at will. She very much wanted to know what the future held for this man. "I saw your friend scurry off that way, Toran." Mouth twisted with distaste, Caroline gave a vague wave of her hand. "You will find him near the drink, I think, or else bothering the serving girls. Later, my precious." He tried to touch her cheek and looked amused when she stepped back. Without a pause, he transferred his amusement to Rand, and the sword at his side. "Would you care for a little sport, cousin? I call you that because we will be cousins once Caroline is my wife. With practice swords, of course." "Certainly not," Caroline laughed. "He is a Toran, and scarce knows one end of that thing from the other. His mother would never forgive me if I allowed sport," Rand said abruptly. "I might as well see where this leads." "I agree." Chapter 36. Blades. Min did not know whether to groan or shout or sit down and cry. Caroline, staring wide-eyed at Rand, seemed in the same quandary. With a laugh, Toran began rubbing his hands together. "Listen, everyone," he shouted. "You are going to see some sport. Clear of space. Clear of space." He strode off, waving people away from the center of the tent. "Sheep herder," Min growled. "You're not worth brains. You don't have any brains." "I would not put it quite so," Caroline said in a very dry voice. "But I suggest you leave now. Whatever tricks you think you might use, there are 7 Aes Sedai in this tent. 4 of them Red Ajah lately arrived from the south on their way to Tar Valon. Should one of them so much as suspect, I very much fear that whatever might have come of today never will. Leave. I won't use any tricks." Rand unbuckled his sword belt and handed it to Min. "If I've touched you and Darlin in one way, maybe I can touch Toran in another." The crowd was pushing back, opening up an area 20 paces across between 2 of the great center poles. Some looked to Rand, and there was a great deal of rib nudging and sly laughter. The Aes Sedai were offered pride of place, of course. Katswin and her 2 friends on one side, 4 ageless women in Red Ajah shawls on the other. Katswin and her companions were eyeing Rand with open disapproval, and as close to irritation as any Aes Sedai ever had shown. But the Red Sisters looked more concerned with those 3. At least, although they stood directly opposite, they seemed oblivious of the presence of any other sisters. Caroline's low voice almost crackled with urgency. She stood very close, her neck craned to look up at him. Barely reaching his chest, she seemed ready to box his ears. If you use none of your special tricks, Caroline went on, he can hurt you badly, even with practice swords and big men. He has never liked another touching what he believes his heels, and he suspects every big young man who speaks to me of being my lover. When we were children, we watched a friend down the stairs and broke his back because Darrowin rode his pony without asking. Go, cousin. No one will think less. No one expects a boy to face a blade master. Jaisi, whatever your real name is, help me convince him. Min opened her mouth, and Rand laid a finger across her lips. I am who I am, he smiled, and I don't think I could run from him if I wasn't. So he's a blade master. Unbuttoning his coat, he strode out into the cleared area. Why must they be so stubborn when you least wish it? Caroline whispered in tones of frustration. Min could only nod in agreement. Toram had stripped to shirt and breeches and carried 2 practice swords, their blades bundles of thin laths tied together. He raised an eyebrow at the sight of Rand with his coat simply hanging open. You will be confined in that, cousin. Rand shrugged. Without warning, Toram tossed one of the swords. Rand caught it out of the air by the long hilt. Those gloves will slip, cousin. You want a firm grip. Rand took the hilt in both hands and turned slightly sideways, blade down and left foot forward. Toram spread his hands as if to say he had done all he could. Well, at least he knows how to stand, he laughed, and on the last word darted forward, practice sword streaking for Rand's head with all his might behind it. With a loud clack, bundled blades met bundled blades. Rand had moved nothing except his sword. For a moment, Toram stared at him, and Rand looked back calmly, then began to tense. That was all Nick could call it, that movement, wooden blades flickering and spinning. She had watched Rand practice the sword against the best he could find, often against 2 or 3 or 4 at once, but that had been nothing to this. So beautiful, and so easy to forget that had those lathes been steel, blood could have flowed, except that no blade, steel or lathes, touched flesh. Back and forth they danced, circling one another, swords now probing, now slashing, Rand attacking, now defending, and every movement punctuated by those loud clacks. Caroline gripped Min's arm hard without taking her eyes from the contest. He is also a blade master, she breathed. He must be. Look at him. Min was looking, and hugging Rand's sword belt and scabbarded blade as if they were hidden, back and forth in beauty, and whatever Rand thought, Toram clearly wished his blade was steel. Cold rage burned on his face, and he pressed harder, harder. Still no blade touched anything but another, yet now Rand backed away constantly, sword darting to defend, and Toram moved forward, attacking, eyes glittering with icy fury. Outside, someone screamed, a wail of utter horror, and suddenly the huge tent snapped up into the air, vanishing into a thick grayness that hid the sky. Fog billowed on every side, filled with distant shrieks and bellows. Thin tendrils wafted into the clear, inverted bowl left by the tent. Everyone stared in amazement. Almost everyone. Toram's lathe blade smashed into Rand's side with a bone-crack sound, doubling him over. You are dead, cousin, Toram sneered, lifting his sword high to strike again, and froze, staring, as part of the heavy gray mist overhead solidified. A tentacle of fog, it might have been, a thick, three-toed arm reaching down, closed around the stout red sister, snatching her into the air before anyone had a chance to move. Katsuen was the first to overcome shock. Her arms rose, shaking back her shawl. Her hands made a twist, and a ball of fire seemed to shoot upward from each palm, streaking into the mist. Above, something suddenly burst into flame, one violent gout that vanished immediately, and the red sister fell back into sight, dropping with a thud face down on the carpets near where Rand knelt on one knee, clutching his side. At least she would have been face down, had not her head been twisted around so her dead eyes stared up into the fog. Whatever scraps of composure remained in the tent fled with them. The shadow had been given flesh. Screaming people fled in every direction, knocking over tables, nobles clawing past servants, and servants past nobles. Buffeting
Hey, just chilling. How you doing, bro?
Are you all right? She asked, pulling him to his feet. She was surprised to see Caroline on the other side helping him too. For that matter, Caroline looked surprised. He took his hand from beneath his
Just chilling. About to do a dab.
I think we best move, he said, taking his sword belt. We have to get out of this. The inverted bowl of clear air.
Yeah, I'm good.
Almost everyone else had fled. Out in the fog, screams, smoke, a rock birthday, it all was replaced by him. I agree, Thomas, Darling said. Sword in hand, he planted himself on his back to Caroline, between her and the fog. The question is, in which direction? And also, how far do we have to go? This is his work. Al Thorns. Hurling down his practice sword, he stalked to his discarded coat and calmly donned it. Whatever else he was no coward. Jarael, he shouted at the fog as he fastened his sword belt. Jarael, the light burn you, man, where are you? Jarael! Mordeth feigned, did not answer, and he went on shouting. The only others still there were Katsura.
I'm assuming so.
Katsue herself might have been setting out for a stroll. I should think not, she said. The slope lies close to that way. Stop that cattle ball and follow. Even your man's dead, you can't hear him. For I'm glaring at the discussion. Katsue was not She looked straight at Rand when she said that, and he gave her a nod before buckling his sword belt and drawing his blade. Trying not to goggle, Min exchanged glances with Caroline. The other woman's eyes looked as large as teacups. The eyes said I knew who he was, and she was going to keep anyone else from knowing. I wish we had not left our warders back in the city, the slim yellow sister said. Tiny silver bells in her dark hair chimed as she tossed her head. She had almost as commanding an air as Katsue, enough that you did not realize how pretty she was at first, except that toss of her head seemed, well, a touch petulant. I wish I had Roshan here. A simple.
Oh, shit. Yeah, you definitely got to be careful on how much edibles you eat, because they tend to hit you a little different.
If you see something, you must be able to strike at it without waiting to point it out for me. Sanitsu, stop worrying about Roshan. We have 3 fine swords here, 2 of them heron markers. They will do. Toram showed his teeth on seeing the heron engraved on the blade rounded unsheathed. If it was a smile, it held no mirth. His own bared blade bore a heron too. Darling's did not, but he gave Rand and his sword a weighing look, then a respectful nod that was considerably deeper than he had offered Thane Thomas the hand of a minor branch of the house. The gray-haired Green had taken charge.
Once in a while, we have, at least my brother, most hated grower, has a magic butter machine. It's set up to where you could pretty much throw everything in there and push a button. But with that, you can make butter, tinctures, and oils. But yeah, you just throw your wheat in there, your butter,
Katswing just
push a button, and
muttered something.
most you gotta do is strain it with the cheesecloth.
He kept his mouth shut. Right then, Min almost thought
But that way we actually infused our ham for Thanksgiving.
He smiled at her as though fog in this weather was nothing, even a fog that snatched clothes and people. They moved into the thick mist in a formation like a six-pointed star, Katswing herself in the lead, and Aes Sedai at each of two other points, a man with a sword at three. Foram, of course, protested loudly at bringing up the rear, until Katswing mentioned the honor of the rear guard or some such. Min had no objection whatsoever to his position with Caroline and towards the star. She carried a knife in either hand and wondered whether they would be any use. It was something of a relief to see the dagger in Caroline's fist tremble. At least her own hands were steady.
Uh,
She thought she might be too
they were both,
The fog was cold as winter.
and this one came with the clip, little glass thing, and it came with the titanium tip along with the quartz tip, plus like extension here to make it longer for some reason. But this one was 25, and then this one also was 25, and this one is a backwoods one. Actually came with a little bag. But at least here they're both about $25 each. And this one, compared to this one, it's better quality. This one, with the exception of this part and the tip, the rest of it's like on the thin side. But they both hit pretty good. This one hits little bigger hits with this one. This one I might be able to get just big hits as long as I dial in the right temp. That's all I gotta do for both of them is dial in the right temp for them, and I'll be getting nice hits.
Samitsu knelt briefly beside him, putting her fingers against the bloody ruin of his forehead. Rising, she shook her head, and they moved on. Up slope and up, until Min began wondering whether they were climbing a mountain instead of a hill. Right in front of Darlin, the fog suddenly began to take on form, a man-high shape, but all tentacles and gaping mouths full of sharp teeth. The High Lord might have been no blade master, but he was not slow. His blade sliced through the middle.
I'll be smoking weed too if I had any more left, but my harvest is, that shit didn't last very long.
Well, he said, at least we know steel can cut these creatures. The thicker chunks of fog oozed together, began to rise once more. Katswing stretched out her hand, droplets of fire falling from her fingertips. One bright flash of flame seared the solidifying fog from existence. No more than cut, so it seems, she murmured. Ahead to their right, in swirling gray, silk skirts fell down the slope. I thought I was alone. Light behind her fog drifted had it been a man, for a moment there was clear air where it had been, and along the line that the bar had burned.
Let's let it cool down a little bit.
A moment while the woman froze where she stood.
Oh, it will.
Shrieking at the top of her lungs,
I don't want to get a gnarly hot dab like I did earlier. That shit still hurts.
more than nightmares in these mists. You, Toram roared, so loud that he spun his face into her. He stood pointing. You are him. Right. This is your work. You will not trap me, Althor. Suddenly he broke away at an angle, scrambling wildly up the slope. You will not trap me. Come back, Darlin shouted after him. We must stick together. We must... He trailed off, staring at Rand. You are him. The light burned me. You are. He half moved as if to place himself between Rand and Caroline.
How long is this series? Let me see. Because we're still listening to the same book, but...
And flapped his face so hard, his head jerked. Min's breath
Let me
caught in
see.
shock. You will not do that again, Cadsuane said. There was no heat in her voice. Just
We're on book 7,
not
and there is...
not ever. Surprisingly, Rand only rubbed his cheek. You were wrong.
15 books.
He's real. I'm certain of it. I know he is. Even more surprisingly, he sounded as if he very much wanted her to believe. Min's heart went out to him. He had mentioned hearing voices. He must mean that. She raised her right hand toward him, forgetting for the moment that it held the knife, and opened her mouth to say something comforting, though she was not entirely sure she would ever be able to say that in the word innocuously again. She opened her mouth, and Padan Fain seemed to leap out of the mists behind Rand, steel gleaming in his fist. Behind you! Min screamed, pointing with the knife in her outstretched right hand as she threw the one in her left. Everything seemed to happen at once, half seen in wintry fog. Rand began to turn, twisting aside, and Fain also twisted, to lunge for him. For that twist, her knife missed, but Fain's dagger scored along Rand's left side. It hardly seemed to more than slice his coat, yet he screamed. He screamed, a sound to make Min's heart clench, and clutching his side, he fell against Cadsuane, catching at her to hold himself up, pulling both of them down. Move out of my way, one of the other sisters shouted. Samitsu, Min thought, and suddenly Min's feet jerked out from under her. She landed heavily, grunting as she hit the slope together with Caroline, who snapped a breathless, blood and fire. Everything at once. Move! Samitsu shouted again as Darlin lunged for Fain with his sword. The bony man moved with shocking speed, throwing himself down and rolling beyond Darlin's reach. Strangely, he cackled with laughter as he scampered to his feet and ran off, swallowed in mirth almost immediately. Min pushed herself up, shaking. Caroline was much more vigorous. I will tell you now, Aes Sedai, she said in a cold voice, brushing at her skirts violently. I will not be treated so. I am Caroline Domodrit, High Seat of House... Min stopped listening. Cadsuane was sitting on the slope above, holding Rand's head in her lap. It had only been a cut. Fain's dagger could not have more than touched him. With a cry, Min threw herself forward. Aes Sedai or no, she pushed the woman away from Rand and cradled his head in her arms. His eyes were closed, his breathing ragged, his face felt hot. Help him! She screamed at Cadsuane, like an echo of the distant screams in the mist. Help him! A part of her said that did not make much sense after pushing her away, but his face seemed to burn her hands. Samitsu quickly, Cadsuane said, standing and rearranging her shawl. He's beyond my talent for healing. She laid a hand on the top of Min's head. Girl, I will hardly let the boy die when I haven't taught him manners yet. Stop crying. It was very strange. Min was fairly sure the woman had done nothing to her with power, yet she believed. Teach him manners. A fine tussle that would be. Unfolding her arms from around his head, not without reluctance, Min backed away on her knees. Very strange. She had not even realized that she was crying, yet Cadsuane's reassurance was enough to stop the flow of tears. Sniffing, she scrubbed at her cheeks with the heel of her hand as Samitsu knelt beside him, placing fingertips on his forehead. Min wondered why she did not take his head in both hands the way Moiraine did. Abruptly, Rand convulsed, gasping and thrashing so hard that a flailing arm knocked the yellow...
Hell yeah, just chill. I try to keep it like that. Just chill. smoke and listen to a book.
But his eyes were still closed. She touched his cheek. Cooler than it had been, but still too warm and pale. Something is amiss.
Right?
She said peevishly as she sat.
That's why I try to keep it chill like this, just because
She gripped the slice
less
of
drama,
shirt and ripped a wide gap
more
in the
chill. Just smoke,
cut from Fane's dagger.
chill, listen to a book, zone out.
Ran right across the old brown stone. Even in the dim light, Min could see that the edges of the gap were as if the wound had gone untended for years. It was no longer bleeding.
Right?
Wounds lifted themselves up like funny things. This, said Mr. Second Production, lightly touching the swell, seems like a cyst, or even instead of pus. And this, she grinned his own emotion, seems full of a different feeling. Suddenly she found the green scattered over her, and her face became sullen and offensive. If I had the words, Katswing, I would use them. I have never seen such. Never. But I will tell you this. I think if I had been one moment slower, perhaps if you had not tried first, he would be dead now. With a sigh, the yellow late. As it is, I believe he will die. Min shook her head, trying to say no, but she could not seem to make her tongue move. She heard Caroline murmuring a prayer. The woman stood gripping one of Darlin's coat sleeves with both hands. Darlin himself frowned down at Rand as though trying to make sense of what he saw. Katswing bent to pat Famitsu's shoulder. You are the best living, perhaps the best ever, she said quietly. No one has the healing to compare with you. Famitsu stood, and before she was all eyes to die serenity once more. Katswing, scowling down at Rand with her hands on her hips, fall. I will not allow it. Boy, she groaned. His head. This time, instead of touching the top of Min's head, she rapped it with a knuckle. Get to your feet, girl. You're no milksop. Any fool can see that, so stop pretending. Darling, you will carry. Bandages must wait. This fog is not leaving us, so we had better leave it. Darling hesitated. Maybe it was Katswing's peremptory frown, and maybe the hand Caroline half raised to his face. But abruptly he sheathed his sword, muttering under his breath, and hoisted Rand across his shoulders, which arms and legs dangling. Min took up the heron-marked blade and carefully slid it into the scabbard hanging from Rand. They were moving to Rand, and after Min, how would you think of Min? She had bundled all her troubles into Min's sister. Fog and the distant shrieks once more, with him carrying Rand in the center and the women in a circle around him. Min knew she was only another pair of eyes, just like Caroline on the other side of Katswing, and she knew the knife she carried unsheathed was no use against the missed shapes, but Padan Fane might still be alive out there. She would not miss again. Caroline carried her dagger too, and by the looks she cast over her shoulder at Darlin, staggering uphill under Rand's weight, maybe she also intended to protect the dragonly boy. Any amount of news. Shape still and tore a shrieking right before any eyes that I could see it. Min was quite noisily sick after that, and not a bit ashamed. People were dying, but at least the people had come here by their own choice. The meanest soldier could have run away yesterday had he chosen. Shapes formed, and people died, screaming always in the distance it seemed, though they still stumbled past torn carrion that had been human an hour gone. Min began to wonder whether they would ever see daylight again. With shocking suddenness and no warning, she stumbled into the surrounded by gray, burning sky, all so bright she had to shade her eyes. And there, perhaps 5 miles across all but treeless hills, Kyrian rose solid and square on its own prominences. Somehow it did not look quite real anymore. Staring back at the edge of the fog, she shivered. It was an edge, a billowing wall, stretching through the trees on this hilltop, and far too straight, with no eddies or thinning. Just clear air here and there, thick gray. A little more of a tree right in front of her became visible, and she realized the mist was creeping back, perhaps being burned off by the sun, but far too slowly to make the retreat natural. The others stared at it just as hard as she, even the Aes Sedai. 20 paces off to their left, a man suddenly scrambled into the clear air on all fours. The front of his head was shaved, and by the battered black breastplate he wore, he was a common soldier. Staring about wildly, he did not appear to see them, and went scrambling on down the hillside, still on hands and knees. Farther to the right, 2 men and a woman appeared, all running. She had stripes of color across the front of her dress, but how many was hard to say, since she had gathered her skirts as high as she could to run faster, and she matched the men stride for stride. None of them looked to either side, only launched themselves down the hill, falling, tumbling, and coming back to their feet, running again. Caroline studied the slim blade of her dagger for a moment, then thrust it hard into its sheath. So vanishes my army, she sighed. Darlin, with Rand still unconscious across his shoulders, looked at her. There is an army in Tyr if you call. She glanced at Rand, hanging like a sack. Perhaps, she said. Darlin turned his head toward Rand's face with a troubled frown. Catswain was all practicality. The road lies that way, she said, pointing west. It will be faster than walking cross-country, an easy stroll. Easy was not what Min would have called it. The air seemed twice as hot after the fog's cold. Sweat rolled out of her and seemed to drain her strength. Her legs wobbled. She tripped over exposed roots and fell flat on her face. She tripped over rocks and fell. She tripped over her own heeled boots and fell. Once her feet just went out from under and she slid a good 40 paces down the hillside on the seat of her breeches, arms flailing until she managed to snag a sapling. Caroline went sprawling as many times, and maybe more. Dresses were not made for this sort of travel, and before long, after a tumble head over heels ended with her skirts around her ears, she was asking Min the name of the seamstress who made her coat and breeches. Darlin did not fall. Oh, he stumbled and tripped and skidded every bit as much as they, but whenever he started to fall, something seemed to catch him, to steady him on his feet. In the beginning, he glared at the Aes Sedai, all proud tyrant high lord who would carry Rand out without any help. Catswain and the others affected not to see. They never fell. They simply walked along, chatting quietly among themselves, and caught Darlin before he could. By the time they reached the road, he looked both grateful and hunted. Standing in the middle of the broad road of hard-packed earth in sight of the river, Catswain flung up a hand to stop the first conveyance that appeared, a rickety wagon drawn by 2 moth-eaten mules and driven by a skinny farmer in a patched coat who hauled on his reins with alacrity. What did the toothless fellow think he had run into? 3 ageless Aes Sedai, complete with shawls, who might have stepped down from a coach a moment before. A sweat-soaked Kyrian and woman of high rank by the stripes on her dress, or maybe a beggar who had clothed herself from a noblewoman's rag closet by the state of that dress. An obvious Tyran nobleman, with sweat dripping from his nose and pointed beard, and carrying another man across his shoulders like a sack of grain, and herself. Both knees out of her breeches, and another tear in the seat that her coat covered, thank the light, though one sleeve hung by a few threads. More stains and dust than she wanted to think about. Not waiting for anyone else, she drew a knife from her sleeve, popping most of those few threads, and gave it a flourish the way Tom Marilyn had taught her, hilt snaking through her fingers so the blade flashed in the sun. "We require a ride to the Sun Palace," she announced, and Rand himself could not have done better. There were times when being peremptory saved argument. "Child," Cadsuane said chidingly. I'm sure Kiruna and her friends would do everything they could, but there isn't a yellow among them. Samitsu and Corel really are two of the best ever. Lady Arilyn has very kindly lent us her palace in the city, so we will take him. No. Min had no idea where she found the courage to say that word to this woman, except it was Rand they were talking about. If he wakes, she stopped to swallow. He would wake. If he wakes in a strange place, surrounded by strange Aes Sedai again, I can't imagine what he might do. You don't want to imagine it. For a long moment she met that cool gaze, and then the Aes Sedai nodded. The Sun Palace, Cadsuane told the farmer, and as fast as you make these flea bags move. Of course, it was not quite so simple, even for Aes Sedai. Ander Toll had a wagon load of scraggly turnips he intended to sell in the city, and no intention of going anywhere near the Sun Palace, where he told them the dragon reborn 8 people who were cooked on spits by Aiel women 10 feet tall. Not for any number of Aes Sedai would he venture within a mile of the palace. On the other hand, Cadsuane tossed him a purse that made his eyes pop when he looked inside, then told him she had just bought his turnips and hired him and his wagon. If he did not like the notion, he could give the purse back. That, with her fists on her hips and a look on her face that said he might just eat his wagon on the spot.
Hey, homeless in America, how you doing?
Ander Toll was a
Hope you're doing well. And staying safe out there.
Unloaded the wagon, turnips simply flying into the air to land in a tidy pile by the roadside. By their icy expressions, this was in no way a use to which they'd ever expected to put the one collar. By Darlin's expression, standing there with Rand still on his shoulders, he was relieved they had not called on him to do it.
Oh shit, happy birthday.
With his jaw trying to reach his knees, fingering the purse as though wondering whether it was enough.
Hope you had a good one.
Once they were settled in the wagon bed, with the straw that had been beneath the turnips all gathered to make a bed for Rand, Cadsuane faced Min across him. Master Toll was flapping his reins and finding
it's over in 45 minutes.
The wagon lurched and jounced horribly, the wheels not only shaking but apparently out of round. Wishing she had kept just a little of the straw for herself, Min was amused to see Samitsu and Leanda growing tighter.
That's what it seems like as you get older.
Caroline
It's just another day.
The high seat of House Dumbledore not bothering to hide her pleasure that the Aes Sedai were for once riding rough. Though in truth, slight as she was, she bounced higher and came down with harder thumps than they. Darlin.
Oh shit, yeah, you're an hour behind me.
However hard he was shaken, he kept frowning and looking from Caroline to Rand. Cadsuane was another who apparently did not care whether her teeth rattled. I expect to be there before nightfall, Master Toll, she called, producing more flapping, if no more speed. Now tell me, she said, turning to Min, exactly what happened the last time this boy woke so strange Aes Sedai. Her eyes caught Min's and held them. He wanted it kept secret if it could be, for as long as it could be, but he was dying, and the only chance he had that Min saw rested in these 3 women. Maybe knowing would not help. Maybe knowing would at least make them understand something of him. They put him in a box, she began. She was not sure how she went on, except that she had to, or how she kept from bursting into tears, except that she was not going to break down again when Rand needed her. But somehow she continued through the confinement and the beatings without a tremor in her voice, right to Kiruna and the rest kneeling to swear fealty. Darlin and Caroline looked stunned. Samitsu and Leanda looked horrified, though not for the reason she would have supposed, it turned out. He stilled 3 sisters? Samitsu said shrilly. Suddenly she slapped a hand over her mouth, then twisted around to lean over the side of the swaying wagon and retch loudly. Leanda joined her.
Yeah, because for us, we're only at about, I guess it's a little cold. We're at about 35.
Cadsuane touched Rand's pale face, brushed strands of hair from his forehead. Do not be afraid, boy, she said softly. They made my task.
I remember being out and about like that when it was this time of year. It really sucked.
Min turned to ice inside.
Hopefully you had you in there with a good sleeping bag.
Wagon, but Cadsuane told master told not to stop, and he flailed at his mules all the harder. People in the streets leaped out of the way to avoid being run down, and the wagons.
I remember I ended up getting
curses, overturned sedan chairs, and
well, my pack and my sleeping bag actually came from Army surplus store. So my sleeping bag, it was in cheap parts. But I put it together with the insert and whatnot, it would be good for temperatures in the negatives. I think it was actually rated for like -5.
Cadsuane must have repeated 1,000 times that he was not dead as they hurried into the palace and along corridors that seemed longer than men remembered.
And it was like the old school mummy bag, so it covered your head and all.
Nobles began appearing from every doorway and crossing hall that seemed.
Yeah, during the summer, I didn't have it put together.
She lost track of Caroline and Darlin, realized she could not remember seeing them since.
Nice. 0-degree one's always good to have.
Rand was the only thing she cared about, the only thing in the world.
If it's cold out, it's definitely going to keep you toasty.
Guarding the doors to Rand's rooms with their gilded rising suns. When the graying maiden saw Rand,
that and I had insulated bibs at the time too.
What has happened to him? She wailed, eyes going wide. What has happened? Some of the other maidens began to moan, a low, hair-raising sound like a dirge. Be quiet, Cadsuane roared, slapping her hands together in a thundercrack. You, girl, he needs his bed. Hot. Nandera, hot. Rand was stripped and in his bed in a twinkling, with Samitsu and Neanda both hovering over him, the Kyrianan chased out, and Nandera at the door repeating Cadsuane's instructions that he was not to be disturbed by anyone. All so fast, Min felt dizzy. She hoped one day to see the confrontation between Cadsuane and the wise one Cerelia. It had to come, and it would be memorable. Yet if Cadsuane thought her instructions were really going to keep everyone out, she was mistaken. Before she had moved a chair, floating it on the power to sit beside Rand.
If you had a regular mummy, or if you had a regular sleeping bag that wasn't able to cover your head, always good to have a beanie. Throw a beanie on and throw a hoodie on. Crawl into your sleeping bag.
Vera saw Cadsuane. To Min's amazement, they stopped there with their mouths hanging open. He is in good hands, Cadsuane said. Unless one of you has suddenly found more talent for healing than I recall. Yes, Cadsuane, they said meekly. No, Cadsuane. Min closed her own mouth. Samitsu took an ivory-inlaid chair against the wall.
Yeah, pretty much.
Her dark yellow skirts, and sat with her hands folded, watching Rand's chest rise and fall beneath the sheet.
Well, that's how I used to sleep before I was able to get a sleeping bag. It was one of those itchy wool blankets. Is all I had. I had a backpack, but it was just like
why aren't you doing
a basic like backpack you take to school or something like that. Like Ozark's like cheap little backpack. But yeah, that's pretty much was my what I was sleep with was a blanket.
You may go, she said. And Kiruna, Cerelia wishes to see you again. Kiruna's dark face paled, but the pair of them rose and curtsied, murmuring, Yes, Amis, even more meekly than for Cadsuane, before leaving with embarrassed glances at the Green Sister. Interesting, Cadsuane said when they were gone. Her dark eyes locked with Amis's blue, and Cadsuane at least seemed to like what she saw. At any rate, she smiled. I should like to meet this Cerelia. She's a strong woman. She seemed to emphasize the word strong. The strongest I've ever known, Amis said simply, calmly. You would never have thought Rand lay senseless in front of her. I do not know your healing, Aes Sedai. I trust that you have done what can be done. Her tone was flat. Min doubted how much Amis did trust. What can be done has been, Cadsuane sighed. All we can do now is wait. While he dies, a man's harsh voice said, and Min jumped. Dashiva strode into the room, his plain face contorted in a scowl. Flynn, he snapped. Neanda's book thudded to the floor from apparently nerveless fingers. She stared at the three men in black coats as she would have at the Dark One himself. Pale-faced, Samitsu muttered something that sounded like a prayer. At Dashiva's command, the grizzled Asha man limped to the bed on the opposite side from Katswain and began running his hands along the length of Rand's still body a foot above the sheet. Young Narishma stood frowning by the door, fingering the hilt of his sword, those big dark eyes trying to watch all three Aes Sedai at once. The Aes Sedai and Amis. He did not look afraid, just a man confidently waiting for those women to show themselves his enemies. Unlike the Aes Sedai, Amis ignored the Ashaman, except for Flynn. Her eyes followed him, smooth face, utterly expressionless, but her thumb ran along the haft of her belt knife in a very expressive manner. "What are you doing?" Samitsu demanded, leaping up from her chair. Whatever her unease about Ashaman, concern for her unconscious patient had overcome it. "You, Flynn, or whoever you are." She started toward the bed, and Narishma flowed to block her. Frowning, she tried to go around, and he put a hand on her arm. "Another boy with no manners," Katswain murmured. Of the three sisters, only she displayed no alarm whatsoever at the Ashaman. Instead, she studied them over steepled fingers. Narishma flushed at her comment and removed his hand, but when Samitsu tried to go around him again, he once more stepped in front of her. She settled for glaring past his shoulder. "You, Flynn, what are you doing? I won't have you killing him with your ignorance. Do you hear me?" Min practically danced from foot to foot. She did not think an Ashaman would kill Rand, not on purpose, but he trusted them. But Light, even Amis did not seem sure, frowning from Flynn to Rand. Flynn stripped the sheet down to Rand's waist, exposing the wound. The gash looked neither better nor worse than she remembered, a gaping, angry, bloodless wound slicing across the round scar. He appeared to be sleeping. "He can't do any worse than Rand already is," Min said. Nobody paid her any mind. Dashiva made a guttural sound, and Flynn looked at him. "You see something, Ashama?" "I have no talent for healing," Dashiva said, twisting his mouth wryly. "You're the one who took my suggestion and learned." "What suggestion?" Samitsu demanded. "I insist that you be quiet, Samitsu," Katswain said. She seemed to be the only one in the room who was calm aside from Amis, and from the way the wise one kept stroking her knife hilt, Min was not certain about her. "I think the last thing he wants to do is harm the boy." "But Katswain," Neanda began urgently, "that man is—" "I said be quiet," the gray-haired Aes Sedai told her firmly. "I assure you," Dashiva said, managing to sound oily and harsh at the same time, "Flynn knows what he's about. Already he can do things you Aes Sedai never dreamed of." Samitsu sniffed loudly. Katswain merely nodded and sat back in her chair. Flynn traced his finger along the puffy gash in Rand's side and across the old scar. That did seem more tender. "These are alike, but different, as if there's two kinds of infection at work. Only it isn't infection, it's darkness. I can't think of a better word." He shrugged, eyeing Samitsu's yellow-fringed shawl as she frowned at him, but it was a considering look she gave him now. "Get on with it, Flynn," Dashiva muttered. "If he dies—" Nose wrinkled as though with bad smell, he seemed unable to look away from Rand. His lips moved as he talked to himself, and once he made a sound, half sob, half bitter laugh, without his face changing one line. Drawing a deep breath, Flynn looked around the room at the Aes Sedai, at Amis. When he caught sight of Min, he gave a start, and his leathery face reddened. Hastily, he rearranged the sheet to cover Rand to his neck, leaving only the old wound and the new exposed. "I hope nobody minds if I talk," he said. beginning to move calloused hands above Rand's side. Talking seems to help a mite. He squinted, focusing on the injuries, and his fingers writhed slowly, very much as though he was losing threads, Min realized. His tone was almost absent, only part of his mind on the words. It was healing made me go to the Black Tower, you might say. I was a soldier till I took a lance in my thigh. Couldn't grip a saddle proper after that or even walk far. That was the 15th wound I took in near 40 years in the Queen's Guards. 15 that counted anyway. It don't if you can walk or ride after. I've seen a lot of friends die and then walk.
1 second.
So I
Right back.
and the Mahale taught me healing. A rush of healing. I was healed by an Aes Sedai once. Nigh on 30 years back now. And this hurts compared to that. Works as well. Then one day Dashiva here, pardon, Ashaman Dashiva, says he wonders why it's all the same. No matter if a man's got a broke leg or a cold. And we got to talking, and, well, he's got no feel for it himself, but me, seems I got the knack, you might say. The talent. So I started thinking, what if I... There. Best I can do. Dashiva grunted as Flynn abruptly sat back on his heels and wiped the back of his hand across his forehead. Sweat beaded on his face. The first time Min had seen an Ashaman perspire. The slash in Rand's side was not gone, yet it seemed a little smaller, less red and angry. He still slept, but his face seemed less pale. Samitsu darted past Narishma so quickly he had no chance to intervene. What did you do? She demanded, laying fingers on Rand's forehead. Whatever she found with the power, her eyebrows climbed halfway to her hair, and her tone leaped from imperious to incredulous. What did you do? Flynn shrugged his shoulders regretfully. Not much. I couldn't really touch what's wrong. I sort of sealed them away from him for a time anyhow. It won't last. They're fighting each other now. Maybe they'll kill off each other while he heals himself the rest of the way. Sighing, he shook his head. On the other hand, I can't say that they won't kill him, but I think he has a better chance than he did. Dashiva nodded self-importantly. Yes, he has a chance now. You would have thought he had done the healing himself. To Flynn's evident surprise, Samitsu rounded the bed to help him rise. You will tell me what you did, she said, regal tone at strong odds with the way her quick fingers straightened the old man's collar and smoothed his lapels. If only there was some way you could show me, but you will describe it. You must. I will give you all the gold I possess, bear your child, whatever you wish, but you will tell me all that you can. Apparently not sure herself whether she was commanding or begging, she led a very bemused Flynn over by the windows. He opened his mouth more than once, but she was too busy trying to make him talk to see. Not caring what anyone thought, Min climbed onto the bed and lay so she could tuck Rand's head under her chin. Perfectly, she studied the three people gathered around the bed, heads waiting for her children, and he standing opposite, Dashiva leaning against one of the square bedposts in front, all with that real eyes and features dancing around them, all with their eyes intent on the men. No doubt Min saw some disaster there, and Dashiva, any expression, the dark, red scowl, disaster for the Ashaman, and Katsumi, who was not only known to bear on people, but to jump like girls for all their ages to Rand. Katsumi, who would not hurt Rand any more than she had to. Katsumi's gaze met Min's for a moment, and Min shivered. Somehow, she would protect him while he could not protect himself. From Emi, and Dashiva, and Katsumi. Somehow. Unconsciously, she began to hum a lullaby, rocking Rand gently. Somehow.
37. The day after the Festival of Birds dawned to strong winds off the sea.
There we go.
Cut the heat in Udar. A sky without a cloud, and the red gold dome of the sun on the horizon. Big promises for one to the inside, though. Matt hurried down through the Tarasin Palace with his green coat undone and his shirt only half laced in anticipation. He did not quite jump at every sound, but he didn't give a start. Considerably. Swishing her petticoats. One of them smiled in a particularly knowing way. It was all he could do not to run. At the last, he slowed, easing onto the shaded walk bordering the stable yard, almost on tiptoe. Between the fluted columns of the walk, yellowish, reedy plants in big red pottery bowls, vines with wide red striped leaves dangling from the baskets of his hand ran along the scale. Six closed coaches with the green anchor installed in baskets of our lacquered in the doors already waited in line before the tall arched outer gates with teams hitched and livery drivers mounted. He could see Nelisian yawning in a yellow striped coat on the far side of them, and Bannon sat slumped atop in a bended barrel not far from the stable doors, apparently asleep. Most of the other Red Arms were squatting patiently on the stable yard flagstones, a few tossed dice in the shadow of the huge white stables. Elaine stood between Matt and the coaches, just the other side of the screen of plants. Brianna Corley was with her, and close by, 7 more of the women who were at that peculiar meeting he had burst into the evening before. Brianna was the only one not wearing a He half expected to. They had the features of women used to ordering their own lives and others, and most had at least a bit of an age. Yet they watched fresh-faced Elaine with an air of expectation, seemingly on their toes, as though ready to jump at her command. The whole lot caught less than half his attention, though. None of them was the woman who had him ready to jump out of his skin. Kylan made him feel, well, helpless was the only word that seemed to fit, however ridiculous it seemed. "We do not need them, Mistress Corley," Elaine said.
Alright, everyone. I'm probably going to call into this live for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by, and everyone who keeps stopping by and showing me support. Definitely appreciate all y'all support. Until next time, everyone, y'all stay safe out there.